so the change that happened with Orthodoxy is that I realized, no, the whole of life, the whole path of life, the only worthwhile path that doesn't lead into stagnation and emptiness is the path of union with God. It's a battle. It's a warrior's training to then go into an existential fight against the enemy. And it's a war that's been going on for centuries, and that's being fought right inside my heart as well. And so that I can engage in that war. So today I realize, like, I've been retreating and retreating and retreating in that war until there was maybe just a tiny, tiny little beachhead left inside of my heart, and now I have to try and expand from there again. But I've given up a lot of territory in my life, and there's been consequences for it. There's
Mm.
definitely consequences for it.
Welcome to The Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew. This is our podcast series where we interview real folks sharing their real stories of encountering Christ in their discovery of and conversion to Holy Orthodoxy. Our guest today is Paul, the founder of Path of Manliness, an Orthodox Christian men's community that helps men rediscover strength, stability, and brotherhood. Check it out at pathofmanliness.com. He also has a YouTube channel linked below, which I myself has been a subscriber to for several years. He's collabed with big Orthodox names like Father Josiah Trenum, Jay Dyer, and Jonathan Pageau, which makes this an extra special honor for me because Paul was gracious enough to come onto my tiny little channel. Paul, thanks for coming on to The
Honor
Body
will be
Aesthetic.
mine, having such big names over my tiny little channel on my corner. Maybe I've just been going a little bit longer than you, Matthew. Probably that's it.
Well, I appreciate it nonetheless. Go ahead and tell us about your background and ultimately your discovery of the church.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me. Great to be here, and great to just see this upswelling of attention and curiosity and desire to know more about all these people becoming Orthodox. So I'm happy that maybe I was just a couple of years ahead the kind of curve of the massive swell of people coming into the church now. Me and my wife both converted about 7 years ago in 2019. And very, very blessed. Our life is completely transformed and transfigured since that time. Nothing better has ever happened to us. It's given us not just a reason for live, a direction to live, but also an everyday life with love and connection, and something that we've been searching for our whole lives, and found through the church, and Christ as the third person in our marriage, and we have 2 kids so far. Maybe more coming. So
Glory to God.
that's been amazing. Yeah, glory to God. So yeah, how I discovered Orthodoxy, my story. I should start by saying that I was born and grew up in South Africa. I'm living today in Denmark, and we lived in a very traditional home, went to church 5 times a week, actually. And my father was really involved. He was like a pastor in the church. So we had like Bible studies in our home lounge throughout my childhood. And I really got schooled in the Bible and Christianity. And there's a whole lot of things I could point at perhaps, but I just got to say the pull of the world was stronger on my heart than the church. And so as I left school and was kind of moving on in life, then I could feel that there was something else that was attracting me more. And that was money, status, career, woman probably was a big factor there as well. There was seeds of it in my childhood, in my education, in my free time interests, and like the computer games I played, all these kinds of things. But I got pulled away. And so I moved to London from South Africa when I was 18 years old to go off and search my fortune. Ended up traveling around the whole world, hitchhiking through Europe for over a year. Landed up in Egypt, of all places, where I worked as a diving instructor. And there I met a Danish woman. And that's why I'm in Denmark today. She was first. She came down
Wow.
a
Okay.
few times. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
You met your wife in Egypt. Okay. That's
In
crazy.
Egypt. Almost a biblical twist there, right? Certainly I was off in the land of Egypt at that time in my life, increasingly so. But yeah, she came down to South Africa for a year. And then we decided to move to Denmark together. And when I moved to Denmark, I was still nominally a Christian, but wasn't practicing at all. And fairly shortly after I moved to Denmark, I started calling myself an atheist. I remember the first
Mm.
time I told someone, it was actually my partner's sister. I told her that I was an atheist, and it felt like something was breaking inside of me, like I was betraying something from my past. But It seems so much more rational to follow this, modern, progressive, smart society of Denmark, where everything was far better than, backwards, old-fashioned, traditional South Africa. And so I kind of jumped onto that boat and really um, created a life designed around secular, modern, progressive principles, and was very successful at it. I went to university, studied political science. I got a job at Microsoft and was very quickly I did a master's of political science at Copenhagen University, and then quickly got a really good job at Microsoft. I was working with environmental sustainability, and after a while was running all of the environmental sustainability programs for Microsoft globally outside of corporate headquarters in Seattle. So I was like the kind of lead for that global initiative. I had 27 local leads in different countries that I was coordinating with. Um, and all of that was great. And at the same time, there was like a hole in my life somewhere. And that hole became more and more apparent, not least when my relationship to this Danish woman broke. We had one child already. And so that sent me off on a spiritual search. We got divorced, and I started realizing that the things that really mattered in life, I thought was about success, money, getting a good job, and all of these things that I thought would give me lasting happiness. And I realized no, it's actually just emptiness at the end of it, and it's not something that really matters. And so in the beginning, I searched for everything but Christianity, everything but Christ. And I've been, from rock climbing, yoga, tantra, Buddhism, Hinduism, traveling through India and living in Thailand, going to like ashrams and different schools and all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff, ayahuasca, all kinds of things. Then somewhere through Christ, and I have a Substack, Path of Manliness Substack. That's where I've detailed a lot of this stuff. But somewhere through there, actually, one day, Christ kind of appeared at a tantric yoga camp, actually, where Swami gave a lecture on Easter, on
Wow.
Easter Day, about Christ. And just I can't remember anything about what he said, but just Christ appearing there kind of shocked me in a way. And then just right after that, someone gave me a little picture. It was like a Protestant little hand drawing of Jesus Christ. And so I had like a little meditation corner at the time. And so I put up this little picture of Christ right in the middle of my meditation corner next to these like yantras and all these kind of weird esoteric symbols and Ganesha and all Hanuman and all these kinds of things, right? And I just found myself really drawn to the eyes of Christ in this image, like into looking at him. And so and that's when things started changing, I think. So yeah, that was a big change. And around about not that long after that, someone invited me to a men's gathering, and this was not a Christian men's gathering. It was just the guy who led it. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a guy called David Data, who's like a big
Mm.
modern spiritual guru kind of guy, written some books and has a big following. And so it was one of his assistants who ran this men's gathering. Talks a lot about polarity and relationships and said some smart stuff, but
Mm.
also without Christ is obviously not a firm foundation. But this men's gathering, I just could see that I was running around like a headless chicken in my life. I was trying all kinds of stuff, but I had no idea where I was going, what I was trying to achieve. There was no real sense of direction. And being with other men that spoke directly to each other, challenged each other, and yeah, it just seemed to be very healing and helpful for me. I think the
Mm.
root of the problem was really I was just trying to show off in front of women the whole time, and as a young man at that time, single, right?
Mm.
So that really changed things in a big way. And I realized that there's something really good about male fellowship with me. And so I started going to more men's workshops, and I actually started running a men's workshop. I invited some of my friends to do it. And then after a while, I did something called a men's research weekend, where me and two other friends invited a whole lot of guys over to a place, and we spent the whole weekend together just talking about what does it mean to be a man. And Christianity was still nowhere in this area at that time, but there was a lot of people who really found it very interesting what I was doing, and this grew to what we called the European Men's Gathering, where we had like 140 guys from about 30 different countries that all gathered together, right at about the time when Jordan Peterson was becoming massive over
Mm.
in Canada. So was it 2017 or something like that?
Yeah.
That Bill C-16 was coming out. So that was kind of like that brought in this Christian element. And Jordan Peterson got me thinking about Christianity in a way that I hadn't been able to before, because Christianity was kind of like these silly superstitions from my childhood that had no place in a modern life and in a scientific person's understanding. I was university educated. There's nothing about Christianity that was interesting at all for me anymore. But then he started speaking about it in a way. There was one specific thing he spoke about the Bible. And he said, the Bible, it's this book that's older than civilizations. You can't just write it off. At least, the very least, you have to take it seriously on its own terms and contend with it. And that struck a chord with me. That really made sense. And so that led to a process which eventually ended up with me realizing, like, Jesus Christ is God. I think if you start looking at that seriously, start contending with those things. I've again written about this, so I won't go into it. But at this time, I'd never heard of Orthodoxy either. But I realized, like, Jesus Christ is God. So I came back to Denmark and started a process of, like, okay, well, where am I going to go to church? I realized, like, I probably need to go to a church. And it was one of my kind of new agey friends who had a little bit of contact with Orthodox Christianity. And he said to me, Paul, you should check out the Orthodox Church. And then he said, they have the original transmission from Jesus Christ. That's what he said. He has this, and this word transmission, it just really sat with me. And I think, and it spoke to me somehow, and that got me really interested. And looking back on it today, I would say, like, I really think it's the correct word to use, in that I had seen Christianity as a set of ideas and maybe even just a verbal affirmation of faith or something like that. And that was for me, like, being a Christian meant, like, I adopted these ideas. I said I believe in Jesus, but there was nothing I actually had to do. And there wasn't any real, there wasn't any change in my life and somehow. And so the way I understood Orthodoxy and have experienced Orthodoxy is that there's a personal transmission of a faith, which is, and the faith is a whole set of practices and a worldview and understanding of reality and the cosmos and anthropology and all of these things together that have been transferred to me by another human being, by another person, and that's come down through an unbroken line of transmission all the way from Jesus Christ through the apostles and then the bishops and the priestly role that are people that have been anointed to perform these roles, and that's been passed on all the way down. So yeah, that was a slow process. Walking into an Orthodox church for the very first time in my life really was something that I could notice, like, wow, this is very different. It felt very alien, very foreign, at least in many ways. But I could feel a depth and a kind of that there was something very powerful in it. Right from the beginning, I could feel strength in it as well, which
Was this in
very
Denmark that you went to an Orthodox church?
in Denmark, in Copenhagen. There's a tiny little parish in a basement next to Østerport station in Copenhagen, where in this basement there is one Danish guy who holds Danish liturgies every Sunday. He's been doing it since 2012. When we stepped in there, it was for a Vesper service. I think there was the reader and the priest and maybe one other person. And for the first couple of years, and that was pretty much what it was like at Vespers. And Sunday liturgy, there would maybe be 10 people, something like that, 5 people, round about that attending. So I'd say in the whole of Denmark back then, there was maybe 15 Danish people, 50 Danish Orthodox converts. Obviously there's people from Romania and Ukraine and whatever else here, but very, very small. I'd say today that number is probably heading towards the 500. So it's probably about a tenfold increase here as well. So we're maybe similar to what you guys have had. I don't know, maybe it's even more. I don't know if you've had a tenfold increase in the United States, but starting from a far, far lower base. Really, traditional Christianity has been eradicated in this country through the Reformation. They forcibly closed all the monasteries and just very effectively shut down kind of conversation, really. There's no knowledge and understanding of it. It's flooding through social media. It's coming in now in the Danish language as well to a certain extent, but it's still we have very few priests here, so it's very, very, very kind of grassrootsy still, and not a lot.
Let me ask you, Paul, going back to your origin in South Africa, you said you were going to church a lot and your father was, reading the scripture with you and teaching you about Christ in the Bible. I guess, was that like more of a non-denominational type experience?
It was a Pentecostal church.
Pentecostal.
So yeah, my grandfather started it, actually. He was a famous rugby player, And then he had like an experience.
Mm.
His first son was born multi-handicapped, was all kinds of multiple handicaps. And then a Pentecostal priest came and prayed for his son, and the son was healed.
Hmm.
And so my grandfather converted and became very serious about Christianity. He ended up starting his own Pentecostal church. Not like the kind of really crazy, they still played a piano and an organ in the church, no guitars and drums and stuff like that. But there was speaking in tongues, and a very kind of participatory ethic in that church where I grew up in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that gave you such a strong foundation for, what you experienced later in life. And
A foundation, I would say it gave me an inheritance that I squandered.
inheritance. Yeah.
The story of the prodigal son speaks so much to my heart. It's such a powerful universal story in so many ways. It tells the story of our culture and so many of us. And what I really see is that we're given an inheritance by our parents. A lot of us, for a long time, I criticized my parents and spoke. I didn't have much positive to say about them. And today I realized, I was given such an inheritance, and I used it up. I used it up on prodigal living, riotous living. I threw it away, and so yeah, and it's had consequences all of those years living out there, doing all the things that I was doing. But
Well, I think a fascinating thing too is I'm pretty sure in the story of the prodigal son, but also just in general at large in biblical imagery is like Egypt is the land of like decadence and like, where you go to sin pretty much. And so it's funny about your own experience going to Egypt. Like,
yes, symbolism happens. There's probably people in your audience as well know that little saying, right?
exactly.
Symbolism happens. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a little town on the Sinai Peninsula called Dahab, where I lived, not that far from Mount Sinai. And so
Mm.
it actually took me, I was living there for 6 months or something like that before I actually made it out to Mount Sinai. But on that visit, then there was this like, hey, there's this like monastery thing at the foot of Mount Sinai. Let's go check this out. And so I go in there, and I walk in. And as I walk into the church, then there's this massive monk, like, 2 meters tall, with like hair everywhere. And he's swinging an incense thing. And I just, I mean, wow. That image that I was presented with, that was pretty much my experience it was St. Catherine's Monastery, of course, at the foot of Mount Sinai,
Hmm.
one of the oldest monasteries in existence in the world.
Yeah, that's where the
And
burning bush is, right? If I'm
I
correct.
think it's where the burning bush. Yeah, it was originally dedicated, I think, maybe to the burning bush. It was dedicated originally to something else, but then after they found St. Catherine's relics, then they dedicated it to her.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's
So you experienced Orthodoxy back then, like it
back
wasn't.
then.
Yeah, you had a little taste, I guess you could say, or an image,
Yeah, yeah,
well before you
a
stepped
little
in the
seed planted,
church.
I guess, something like that. I don't even know if I really realized. I don't think I knew the difference between. I knew there was a difference between Orthodoxy and Catholic, but I didn't know what it was or what it meant or anything like that. So there was like something about Greeks and Copts or something like that, right? I didn't really know what it
Yeah,
was all.
it's just so fascinating doing these interviews because when people tell their story, it's usually not that there's just this like, Orthodoxy just like pops into your life. It's like there's little bits and pieces that you experience throughout life that are, God planting the seeds. So then ultimately when you yourself, your soul is ready basically to finally say, okay, Christ, like, I'm ready for you. It's like, then it, fully enters your life.
Yeah.
So that's really
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah, and I think I can say like that's very much the case with me. It was about my preparedness and my selfishness, getting over my own selfishness and my own egoism. I actually recalled only, this memory came back to me maybe 5 years ago, where when I was maybe 15 years old, I remember talking to my dad and asking my dad about like sexual sin and this kinds of stuff, and about forgiveness, and kind of quizzing him, and then deciding in my own heart, okay, maybe this Christianity stuff's really important, but I want to go out and explore and experience life, and I don't want to live this life without experiencing life. So I'm going to go out and like experiment and do a whole lot of stuff and explore. And then when I turn like 30 or 40 or something like that, then I'm going to pray and ask God for forgiveness if I still,
Yeah.
can get around to that. And then I'll get the whole package, like, because and I think, at least in my mind, I can't blame necessarily the way I was taught or something like that, but in my mind, you know, Christianity was all about getting to heaven, and I could get to heaven just by asking for forgiveness, and everything else I did in between, it didn't really matter. It wasn't so important. There was no kind of path to walk on. I didn't see any kind of clear, valuable path. So being a Christian, it meant, like, kind of, it was a bit boring in some ways, and then there was all this other stuff that I could be doing. And so the change that happened with Orthodoxy is that I realized, no, the whole of life, the whole path of life, the only worthwhile path that doesn't lead into stagnation and emptiness, is the path of union with God. It's a battle. It's a warrior's training to then go into an existential fight against the enemy. And it's a war that's been going on for centuries, and that's being fought right inside my heart as well. And so that I can engage in that war. And that all of that stuff might have been communicated to me, or just kind of flew over my head as a child. Um, and so today I realize, like, I've been retreating and retreating and retreating in that war until there was maybe just a tiny, tiny little beachhead left inside of my heart, and now I have to try and expand from there again. But I've given up a lot of territory in my life, and there's been consequences for it. There's
Mm.
definitely consequences for it. And so, when I think about what I could have, just listen to some of the people that I admire and look up to today, and listen how they just know the faith. There's an experience, a wealth of wisdom there, where I've used years of my life on, chasing boyish dreams about reality instead of, living in reality the way I see it now.
Yeah, I mean, we all have our own path towards Christ, and sometimes I think that we might have regrets about what we went through, what we experienced, and so we try to tell other people, like, don't go down my path, right? But at the same time, at least looking back in my own life, because I've had my own prodigal son experiences. Even though I grew up Orthodox, there was also a time where I was just like, I don't know if God exists. I don't understand why I have to go to church every Sunday. Like, I just don't see the value in it. It's kind of similar to what you're saying. Um, and I had to suffer, many years through my prodigal son journey, but that suffering was necessary to to soften my heart, to transform my way of thinking, to the point where I was like, I realized I need Christ, and if life had, gone so well, and, like, let's say you were getting the fulfillment you were searching for, the meaning you were searching for, and success and women and what have you, um, we would have no need to search for Christ. We would have no need for Christ, right? But we need him because those things don't ultimately fulfill us. Like, there's nothing in this world, in the material world, that can replace the connection we have with our Creator, because there's only one. That connection only exists in one capacity, and that's because Christ is our Creator, and um, nothing can replace that. So it's just constant searching of something, and a lot of times we don't know what it is, and so we kind of stumble our way. Another brother says, like, stumble our way towards Christ, and that's really what we have to do. And for some people, that stumbling takes longer. For some people, that stumbling is shorter. So another example is, like, in the prodigal son story. I always say the Bible is like a rubric for reality, so it kind of lays out how reality can play out. So there's people that are the prodigal son, which is pretty much most of us. I'd say the majority of us. But there is also the righteous son. Like, there is that example, that pattern, right?
Well, the older brother, I don't know if you right. I'm not sure where it would be used righteous, but yeah, the one who does things right, but his heart is maybe not righteous, right? Like his heart isn't with his father yet.
Sure, yeah.
So
It,
yeah.
it's another struggle, but it's a different struggle. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Well, cool. Okay, so you discovered this tiny church in Copenhagen. You started going there. Was there any, like, I don't know, friction, or when you're learning about Orthodoxy, was there anything that you didn't understand or maybe had to wrestle with?
Um, I had some questions. I think when I look back on it, certainly I was still stuck in a materialist post-enlightenment way of thinking. It was confusing for me why Orthodox countries all seem so poor compared to Western Protestant nations, which seem to have been done financially, materially much richer. I think I've come to realize that, the um, material wealth has come at the expense of spiritual poverty. I couldn't see that. I used to think they went hand in hand
Mm,
to a greater degree. Um, so so that might have been a bit of some of the questions that I had, but I'd say the biggest challenge was really that I invited my parents, including my father, to come and visit the church.
mm,
And my father had grown up Roman Catholic and converted to Pentecostal from there. And so when he came in there, he just saw Roman Catholicism
mm,
and felt a very strong aversion towards it. And so that's been a continual challenge to do that because my father is a far better man than I will ever be. He's incredibly patient. He's a very good listener, and he's extremely authentic. And so that's been I've learned that I haven't been respecting my father either, and I haven't been appreciating what I'd received from him. And so that's difficult. It's difficult to handle because I do fully believe that I've found the fullness of the church and Christ in the Orthodox Church, um, and so yeah, they were not, supporters of me getting baptized Orthodox. I got baptized again, and the, there is a there's still a distance there. Still a distance there because now my biological family, I was like, becoming a Christian was like coming home really to my father in every single way. And I had a communion with my parents for a while that was really beautiful. And then going into Orthodoxy, then now there's a difference between my spiritual family and my biological family.
mm.
And we don't have the same we don't have the same understanding of God. It's not the same. There's many similarities. There's many beautiful things. Like in my parents' values, as I said, like they're much that their character is far better than my character. My parents have been married for my entire life. I've never seen them argue. Even when I was a child, they never argued. My mother is incredibly supportive and loving and submissive to my father. My father loves my mother more than he loves himself, and so that's still great inspiration to me. Um, but then
Isn't it
that
amazing how we criticize our parents when we're young, and then when we become parents, we're like realize how amazing they were and how much respect we have for them?
Yeah, 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 and how there's so I run men's events, men's gatherings, and I especially have done big men's gatherings. I did something called the European Men's Gathering for 5 or 6 years, where we had like 140 guys from a whole bunch of different countries, mainly secular guys. And I used to ask them this question, put them into groups, and then you get them to share with each other. What's one thing or name three things that you appreciate from your mother and that you've got received from her? And most
Mm,
guys will be able to share some really beautiful, good things. Ask them the same question about their dad,
mm,
and most men will struggle. Most men will come up with some things that are not very convincing, and then there'll always be one or two guys in a group of like 10 guys or so. One or two of them will say, "The only thing I've received from my dad is how to not be a man."
mm,
Like I've learned how to not be a man. And this is often guys who've grown up mainly solely with their mothers, who've been with an ugly breakup with the father, and then totally, irrespective of the father's character, I would say, because a lot of time when I hear the stories in detail, then it just seems like, it's really they're seeing the father through a mother's eyes who are very hurt and
mm.
have not in any way, have been extremely angry. They're kind of incorporated their mother's anger towards their father and rejection of him in every single way as a human being, even. So there's like a dehumanization of the father as a predator or as some kind of evil villain, which I think is present everywhere in our culture and our society today. All the stories we tell, the films, Hollywood, everything that comes to us is kind of reinforcing this idea of the father figure as the villain, um, which is
Yeah,
difficult.
yeah. There's a great rejection of the father as an image of our ancestry too, right? It's like we don't look uh, we don't look forgivingly on our ancestry on the lines that we come from. So like in the old times there was an honor and a respect to where it was like we focus on positive aspects of, our fatherhood, our ancestry, and kind of like, not overlook, but forgive the sins of our fathers, right? But in these days, it's like the opposite. It's like we focus on the sins, and that's all we think about. And
And we're all influenced by it. It's just a part of the air
mhm,
that we're breathing in our culture today. None of us are free from it. I think we're not really free from feminism either. All of us are kind of
mhm,
like a little bit walking on eggshells when we talk about the father taking the leadership and, and taking responsibility for the family. So I think we have to admit that. Um, you know, honoring your father and your mother, it's one of the 10 commandments. That's how central it is.
mhm,
But if you ask people like, what does that actually look like? What do you actually do? A lot of people will be like, oh, well, I shouldn't fight with them maybe or something like that. But like, the actual honoring of the mother and father, I think that's even lost for a lot of people in their culture about what it actually means and how to do it. And so, yeah, I like you mentioned, like, the example is with Noah and his sons that like walked backwards and covered their father's sins, right? And
right, with
so we're
respect,
not,
yeah,
yeah, we don't ignore them, but we're not looking to expose them in the way that is happening now. And it's really all connected, I would say, to a hate of God the Father or a demonic plan to undermine our and to kill off people because we are our starting point in life, our foundation is from fatherhood, and so that is when you can destroy fatherhood, you destroy man's relationship to God, and it's in every single aspect and manifestation of it in the family, in the society, whatever it is, right? Then if this is being undermined and destroyed, um, then it's very destructive. It's very, very destructive.
yeah, definitely. When you became a father, when you had your first child, how did that change, I guess, your worldview? Because you were still in this kind of like secular, materialistic space when you had your
Yeah,
first kid, right?
yeah, I was, yeah, yeah. So he's 19 years old today.
Mm.
Um,
Happy birthday.
oh, and yeah, it's not his birthday today, but he's
Sorry.
just um, no, my youngest just turned 3 last week. But
Congratulations.
that's quite a spread. Um, so I got to say, without any kind of Christian worldview and framework, then the impact of fatherhood really didn't go deep into my heart. And so the foundational worldview that I had was a selfish one, and it was very much occupied with myself. So when my child came into the picture, then that's what broke my relationship with my partner because both of us were just too occupied with ourselves and our own plans and ambitions for our world. And so suddenly there was something outside of us that demanded our time and attention, and we couldn't handle dealing with that properly. So I can see, though, looking back at my life, though, that having my son was an anchor into reality for me because even though I broke up with her, I kept the relationship with her and the son, and it wasn't like an ugly breakup or anything like that. So we were able to do things peacefully and calmly, and so with with my son, there were several things that happened that were a wake up call to me that I can point today. You spoke about like little seeds that kind of led into orthodoxy and little things that happened where I kind of got like shaken a little bit and I realized like, well, what am I actually doing and how is this actually impacting his life? And his, a child is so honest as well, and they just react
Mm,
in a very honest way as well. So when dad starts getting involved in like really weird stuff, then he's going to be a good mirror to be able to see that, right? And so that's very exactly what happened when I got into weird and wonderful things. Then I could see how strange it was by looking at my son and seeing his reaction to it because he had that kind of purity, right? He was untainted, and I could see became clear like what is the impact I'm having on him. I suddenly have responsibility for another human being, and I can see what I'm doing to them, and it doesn't actually look that good. That's when I realized like, oh, something's off the task here, because I'd hear some Indian guru talking about non-duality of being and how blah 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 blah, and be like, wow, that sounds so crazy, that's wild, like, oh, that's so intense, right? And then I tried live that way or tell something to my son based on that worldview, right? And he'd be like, "What on earth are you up to, Dad? Like, this is really strange." Um, so that just became like, okay, maybe I'm just flying off a little bit too much here. I need to get grounded again. And so I think there's been a real grounding effect from having a child. I was so childish and immature, boyish when I became a father, but I think we all are. And so obviously some people are far more mature than others, but it has an incredible maturing effect on a man, especially if he's able to stay
Mm.
together with the mother. All of the problems that I had with his mother, all of those, selfish, boyish aspects of my character, I just took those with me for another, however many years until I got married again. And that's when I then started working on those things. So staying with the mother is vital, but it does really mature a man to become a father. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the biggest motivator for me in pursuing the marriage life. Obviously, okay, in Orthodoxy, it's like the two main paths, right, of a person is marriage or monasticism, right? And a lot of young men wrestle with that because a lot of us want to be married, but we struggle with that. And, sometimes we're like, well, am I supposed to be a monk? I don't know. But in my path, I struggled with that, but I knew that I wanted to be married. And I knew that until I was able to achieve that, I was like kind of stuck in this immature limbo because before you're married, every decision you make, everything you do, everything you think, everything about your life, all it does is impact you, right? So I'm the only person I need to think about when it comes to whatever I'm trying to do. As soon as you get married, now you have another person that you need to consider in terms of their physical needs, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs. And then you have children, and then you have, an even another set of people that have even greater needs, right? And so then you start to live for a sacrificial life for others, right? And that's really what causes that maturity to happen. And so I recognize that it was like, especially not just in my life, but in the world at large, it's like adolescence gets perpetuated to ad infinitum, right? Because uh, maturity has nothing to do with age. There's plenty of immature, older folks. So, glory to God, he was able to make that happen for me personally. And then what you said about children being a mirror, I think is a perfect way to describe it because they're a mirror in multiple different ways. And one of the ways they're a mirror is that they're a mirror of who you are because, we don't really experience how other people experience us, right? And there's a lot of things about our personalities, our way of being that, other people don't like, right? There's always conflict and contention when personalities come together. And so you don't really recognize how your personality affects other people. And then when you have a child who is your DNA and they reflect who you are back to yourself. And so the things that other people, that you bother other people about, now you have this little mini version of you that's bothering you in the same way that you bother other people. So, it's like a mirror. It's like, oh, now I realize like, I'm a jerk. I'm this and whatever. I'm selfish. And then in other ways, they're a mirror.
Maybe I can just add in there, like for me, um, it's so easy as a father to see the faults of your wife and your children sometimes, right? But then to realize like, oh well, this is all coming from me. Like
Yeah,
my
exactly.
priest really helped me to see this. Like I'm the source of it. I'm the head, and so the problems that I'm seeing, like these are the things that need to be solved inside of my heart. And it's not something that you think about automatically, but when you do that, then like, it's a really big gift to be able to receive that. Yeah.
Definitely. And, you know, l- um, leadership and power and responsibility are all tied together. And so if you want to be the leader of your household, if you want to be the patriarch, that means you take on the responsibility of that role. And that means like exactly what you said, that you are the source of whatever faults that are happening in the family. You take the responsibility for that. And that's another symptom of the modern age is that, people want the power and the CEO position, but nobody wants the actual responsibility that comes with that. Um, and one thing I would suggest for any young men that are watching this, and this is something that I did myself in my life, is that if you do want to seek power and leadership, you actually seek responsibility. So you take on more responsibility, and that's how you think about it this way. Like if you're working for a company, like for example, Microsoft, if you take on the responsibility of like a scope and let's say a knowledge base, you become an expert on a piece of knowledge, you're going to be the person people come to who need help and advice in that area. So now you kind of hold power in a sense because you've put that responsibility on yourself. So that's they go hand in hand.
Are you familiar with this guy here? Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't
Well,
read the book, but yeah,
he's not a Christian at all. But I think he puts it actually very well in a business case. That is just actually quite inspiring. Actually quite inspiring to take. So there's all kinds of connotations to his work that I think are, but yeah, are concerning, but I definitely think there's something to extreme ownership, and the approach that he takes. So it's like, yeah, if something's wrong, just take ownership for it yourself.
well,
So
it's. I mean,
better.
I know he's not Orthodox, and God willing, we pray for him that one day he'll become Orthodox. But extreme ownership is an Orthodox concept because the idea of looking within and seeing the sin in my own heart and working on the transformation of that through cooperation with God's grace as a means to transform the greater world around you. That's taking ownership for the sins of the world. It's like if you want to find out what's wrong with the world, you look within, right? So
Yeah,
orthodoxy is all
I guess
about
like,
extreme ownership.
for Jocko, like, I think under all of this, he has a deep desire for earning lots of money. I don't know, who knows what motivates him, right? And so as Christians, we're really putting the kingdom of God first. And so, underneath our strategies and our approaches should really be a desire to become more like God. And so that's going to have a very different effect on our desire to put ourselves out there. I struggle with pride and all that kind of stuff. But I think the type of heroes we need today are the types that are forced into acts of heroism by necessity, not ones who decide like, oh, I'm going to go out and, like, change the world and become that whatever thing, right? Like that's a dangerous path, I guess, to take. Yeah.
Definitely. So let's go back to your journey to Orthodoxy. So you started going to this church in Copenhagen. What was like the timeline between when you started going to church and your catechism and then when you got baptized?
It was just under a year of catechism, that until I got baptized. Um, we unfortunately didn't receive a very thorough catechism teaching class, so a lot of it was self-education. One thing I was very happy is that about halfway through, I visited the monastery of Essex
Mm,
and got to speak to Elder Zacharias, uh, who is a disciple of Saint Sophrony, living there.
it's
And
amazing.
yeah, and he took the time to speak to me twice. So I was very honored and blessed, and told me on that conversation, Paul, you should study theology. So he didn't tell me why. I've spoken to him about it since then, why, but he underlined for me like this was more verse was important. So I started fairly soon after that, then studying theology, and so I've been kind of self studying that. But yeah, the cadet, so that's been great. But still, I feel like there was a local catechism that is really important, and I can really see it in people that come into the Orthodox Church today, people who receive from their own local priest a proper introduction to the faith, and an explanation. It's so hard when we have like these part-time priests who have to earn money elsewhere
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, right? But that's a really important element. Yeah. So yeah, I was baptized. I basically I had a girlfriend at the time. I had separated from her when we became Christians because I realized like I need to figure out what I'm going to do with this woman. And so um, around the time that I decided, okay, it's definitely going to be Orthodoxy, and she, independent of me, made that same decision. She also wanted to become Orthodox, and I kind of went back to her and I said, okay, well, now I want us to court with a view to marriage. And so
Mm.
she said yes to that. And then, like a month later, I took her to a monastery and proposed to her there. And we got
Wow.
married a month after that, shortly after we were baptized, right? So that all kind of came right after each other. And then thank God, or like, God's grace, on our wedding night, she fell pregnant with our first child. So that was just like boom, boom, boom. Of course, we only found out about that she was pregnant like about a month later. But that was really something because from when we decided we wanted to become Christians, we decided to become celibate.
Mm.
And and because we'd been living with each other before that, and so we had a period of about 2 years where we were living in celibacy, and then we got married, and then like it really felt like God honored that by then giving us our first child right after that.
That's amazing. Did you have any like spiritual experiences that stood out to you when you're kind of approaching baptism or maybe after baptism?
I'd say that the closest I can get is what I mentioned about like in being in men's fellowship. I really felt like there was a depth of connection there that I had been lacking, and then when I had like and this is probably why, at that stage already, um, I'd started just running some men's groups and doing some men's gatherings, and then just became a full-time job for me. And what
Mm.
I found is that there was a space that was created there where I could experience communion with other people in a far more powerful way. And it's only been strengthened through becoming a Christian as well, is because then all of a sudden we have a shared foundation for understanding the world, and a shared set of spiritual laws that we are set to obey, and that we can encourage each other and admonish each other to obey as well. So it's become a far more powerful thing even to experience brotherhood in that way. And I'd definitely put that at the level of saying it was a spiritual experience of clarity and insight. Like, it was through seeing the spiritual world, like light coming into the world.
Mm.
It was the world clicking into place in a way that it hadn't done before. And so that for me, that's gone hand in hand. The journey to Christianity and the kind of, childhood rejection of fatherhood and men, and masculinity in my childhood, or in my, in my young adult years, to where I realized like, no, this is actually where the good stuff is. And then those things leading towards each other in a very powerful way. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen. And so tell us about Path of Manliness. You've been doing this for how many years? And tell us about the programs that you offer.
Yeah. So the first big event was back in 2017, which is, yeah, almost 10 years ago now, where we did like these big European men's gatherings for quite a few years. But then as I came into Christianity, then I realized that I was working with a whole lot of people to create these big gatherings that was compromising on on what was actually good and healthy for men. I've just released today an article on Substack about false fatherhood, uh, and there was one specific man who I was working very closely with. He was quite a celebrity in Sweden, who was using the work that we were doing to yeah, for rather insidious means. I'll just leave it there for now on this one. People can look for Substack if they want to, but it was quite disgusting. I'm quite shameful about what I was involved in and what I was actually caused. And there's been suicides, and really serious other psychological breakdowns that have been result of what was happening inside the manosphere that I was involved in. Um, and um, so that's been quite a journey to come into the church and realize I need to change everything. And I was also living in Copenhagen at the time, and so for I think it's about 5.5 years ago now, me and my wife, we moved out to bought an old farm in the countryside, like a little homestead.
Mm.
And I kind of really started, okay, I'm going to start doing this all the way from the beginning again. And so it's been really back to basics. I've developed then a focus on man skills, which I believe are central to a man's life and to a way that he can kind of have focus. Obviously, I can't help men with their salvation. They need to go to church for that. That's not my job to help them to experience the grace of God, but I can help them to develop skills that make them good men, men that people appreciate and look up to, and that I would like to have by my side as well. And so that's one thing that we do. And then I run a network of online groups which are focused on accountability. So guys there's an accountability system where guys set a goal and they support each other in reaching the goals that they're aiming for in a group where they're where there's a direct masculine, manly way of talking to each other. So they're not there trying to make each other comfortable, not trying to make friends, not just sharing their emotions, but they're actually aimed at something that they're serious about and reaching for together.
That's amazing. So we're coming to the top of the hour. I like to keep these about under an hour. For closing comments, do you have any advice, maybe specifically for young men that are interested in Orthodoxy, or maybe just discovering Orthodoxy? Do you have any advice to give them in their journey as both a man and a person searching for Christ?
Yeah. I think that what we're all looking for underneath it all, a lot of us are thinking about like women and sex and and that kind of stuff, or money or anything. But I think the core of it all is really we're looking for connection. We're looking for communion with other people, and it's available in your local Orthodox parish. And I think a lot of guys come to a church, and you're going to have very different experiences. You might have a little old lady kind of coming up to you, a babushka, and telling you off, or you might have a really welcoming group of guys coming and talking to you or something like that. But I would say, like, if you go and visit a church, go visit an Orthodox parish, reach out to people, try and have a conversation with people. That's actually, in an Orthodox understanding, again, it's not this kind of abstract idea of salvation through some kind of legal code agreement or something like that, and universal, God. Not having to punish you because of something or other, because he can punish somebody else. Instead, it's about joining a body. You're grafted onto an actual body, and so you come into a church, you'll probably see a whole lot of people that you maybe don't identify with or don't feel are the natural people that you'd make friends with. But try and reach out and have a conversation, and say hi to somebody. I think for me that's a key thing that I can see guys coming into the church, and luckily a lot of parishes now, even ones that have been very centered on foreigners and um, expat communities, then there's more and more now space for people to come in and experience that community, which I think for me that's been absolutely central, to be able to join an actual body of people that are collectively searching, working out their salvation together, and learning to love each other in a community with each other. That's vital, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, united in love through Christ. Well, that's awesome. I appreciate you, Paul, for coming on the show and sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Appreciate the work you're doing, and for taking the time to have me on.
Of course, may be blessed. Thanks everyone for watching. You can find Paul at his YouTube channel, Path of Manliness. Definitely check it out. Go subscribe, and check out his website, pathofmanliness.com. Subscribe to the Substack. A lot of useful and amazing work he's doing over there. So go support him. And we appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time. Thank you.